Welcome to 4C Sports Media. I'm very happy today to be joined by a guy who runs a sports psychology company called Deliver Your Ability, Sean Ryder. How are you, sir?
Yeah, really good, Adam. Good to speak to you.
Brilliant. Thanks for coming on, mate. Well, I came across your name the other day when I was talking to a client of yours, like middleweight Ben Hall, and it seems to be something there used to be a little bit of stigma attached, and I think there is with some people with sports psychology. I don't know if you remember when Frotch and Groves fought, and Frotch made it quite open that he had a sports psychologist, and it was a bit like you're not really a man, that kind of vibe. But when Ben came straight out and told me the other day, and it seems a lot of other people were quite open about it, and I think am I right in thinking that there's a lot of people who misunderstand what sports psychology actually means?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. For that reason, whenever I meet any new client for the first time, one of the very first things I say to them is that, I'll offer you potentially complete confidentiality. But from the other side, if you want to speak about the work that we do, then I'm absolutely fine with that. But you're absolutely right. Some people want to keep it to themselves for many reasons. It could well be that they want to get an edge themselves and don't want to expose that to the world. It might be, as you say, some people still feel that there's a certain element of stigma attached to it, obviously incorrectly in my view, but that's a personal choice for them. So I'm very much guided by them. If they want to talk about it to other people, to journalists, to other fighters, to whoever, then that's great. But if they don't, then that's equally fine. I'm just led by them.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Well, first of all, I'll talk about if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit how you became a sports psychologist and how you started down that road. I see you look after some sort of elite sort of footballers and boxers and things like that. If you wouldn't mind telling us.
That's where I'm at the moment. I mean, it started from sort of my teens. I was always going to be a footballer, but at 16, I was diagnosed with a fractured spine. Which put an end to any chance of a football career. But actually looking back, but going through that sort of 12 months in a cast and so on, at that age has proved to be invaluable in my role as a mental performance coach now, because so many elite athletes become injured at various times during their career, and it can be as much of a mental battle to get through serious injury as it can be a physical one. So when I found that the professional football career wasn't going to be a possibility, I went to university, did a sports science degree, then moved on and did a master's degree in sports psychology, and so set up my business, Deliver Your Ability, and currently complete a PhD at the moment in sports psychology. That's looking more at a professional footballer angle from what footballers can do when they're newly transferred to hit the ground running, and then also what clubs can do to help them. So as time has moved on, I've decided to focus more on just a couple of sports. So football and boxing are the two sports that I'm pretty much 100% focused on from the sporting side.
Okay, brilliant. I'm sort of been looking at your Twitter and things like that, and obviously we spoke about Ben Hall, who you're allowed to talk about. Who else do you look after?
Yeah, well, actually, as I say, I don't sort of do the first move in terms of talking about who I work with, but there'd be quite a number of boxers. I tend to sort of keep around 8 boxers at any one time, and about the same number of footballers. And that goes through it might go up to 10, it might come down to sort of 6, because I tend to work on a camp by camp basis with boxers. And it's very much, the work that I do is very much on an individual basis, but it follows the same procedure that any sort of coach, a trainer would do, or a strength and conditioning coach. First of all, we'll meet up and we'll try and just get a baseline and try and get an understanding of what it is on their mental performance that they want to either improve. It's already good, but they want to improve, or more often than not, something hasn't gone as they wanted, and they want to sort of look to fix it. One I get quite often with boxers is in the gym, they are absolutely brilliant. Sparring, absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
But actually, when it comes to the under the lights, when the pressure's on, things don't quite happen as they want. So that's probably one of the most common starting points that I have with any boxer.
And do you find that example you just mentioned there, have you been successful in sort of getting the fighters to overcome that?
Yeah. I mean, we try and be quite clever about what it is we're trying to do. So I'll give you a perfect example. A trainer called me up and said almost exactly that. He's got a fighter who's like Mayweather in the gym, but he was at the time I think he'd had 3 fights, and had straight victories in all of them, but just hadn't been convincing. And so what we did, I set up a spar, quite a tough spar for him. And we arranged for a load of his friends to come and watch the spar, unbeknown to him.
Really? Oh.
Actually be a sort of a long spar, an 8-round spar. And when the guys arrived, he was obviously quite sort of amused to see a few of his friends there. And for the first 2 rounds, we just let them spar normally while I was chatting to his friends. But then from round 3 and round 4, what we'd agreed with his friends is that they were going to act as if they were a hostile crowd. So they had sort of free rein to call him every name under the sun and question all sorts of things. And you can imagine they thoroughly got into that.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the 4th round, we sort of stopped in it and just explained, right, okay, so for the next 2 rounds, these friends that are here, they are actually your friends. But the scenario now is that they've travelled hundreds of miles from one end of the country to watch you fight. They've paid for the tickets, they've had petrol expenses, they're staying in a hotel, to try and get some of that sort of pressure onto the fighter. So we did that for 2 rounds, and then for the final 2 rounds, it was just back to normal sparring. And then while the boxer's getting showered, I burnt a DVD, sorry. Then afterwards, the trainer, myself, watched it, and we just sort of talked about how he was feeling in the different parts of the spar. And interestingly, what he felt was actually when he felt the crowd were against him, he enjoyed it more. Mm-hmm. You know, it made him more focused. It made him want to put on a really sort of good but controlled show. The problem he found was actually when they were actually supporting him and cheering him, and there was this pressure that he had to perform, that he got quite loose and he wanted to put on a real show, and would be caught with silly shots. Mm. And then that made him even more loose, almost a bit embarrassed, and just almost trying too hard again. So that gave us a really good baseline that this was an area that we wanted to improve, because he was quite a big ticket seller. So he was going to be getting quite good support early on in his career. So we just used that as the basis for how is he going to cope with actually being the favourite, being the supported boxer, being the person of which there's lots of expectations.
Okay, very interesting. Very interesting, all that. Well, you're talking there about, it sounds like, especially the coach you used an example there, they seem to want to work with you. That sounds like it's been quite an easy process. When I spoke to Peter Sims, he mentioned you straight away. Has that always been like that, or was it maybe a bit more of a issue earlier on in your career? Yeah,
I mean, there is very much a sort of a hit and miss attitude when it comes to trainers. Some buy into it greatly, some don't. The one thing that I definitely insist on when I do work with a boxer, though, is that the trainer is completely on board, or at least is fully aware, because in boxing that relationship between trainer and fighter is so important that even if one of them thinks that I'm giving a different message to the other one, even if I'm not, then that can just cause all sorts of problems. So whenever I work with a boxer, I do everything I can to sort of bring the trainer in so that they always know what it is I'm talking about, because I can learn so much from the trainer in terms of what they want to see from their fighters, what they're trying to improve. Yeah. And then if they know what I'm doing as well, then it can really sort of gel, and you get the better benefits for the boxer. So I think boxing to a certain extent is still quite resistant to it, because there's almost still this sort of macho culture and this sort of fear that if you're working on the mental side, that it's a sort of a sign of weakness, and I think that's still prevalent in quite a few boxers. But once I get an opportunity to sit with a trainer or to sit with the fighter, then we can quickly dispel that.
Okay. All right, brilliant. Well, it's good to hear. It's good to hear that the view seems to be. How different is it to football then? What's what the main difference is? Obviously, the sports are very different.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there are some differences, but the thing to remember is that actually within boxing, no two boxers are the same, and so that's the one thing that I've got to be very, very conscious of all the time, because you'll find some boxers. One of the key things that I work with my boxers is I try and get them to understand what's the best intensity level for them to fight at.
Okay.
Because often if you've got a trainer who's sort of very intense, sort of a shouter, a screener, walking around the change room, punching walls and that sort of stuff, then the perception is that that's the way to do it. But there'll be other boxers who, if you force them to be at that level of intensity, then they feel panicked, they're not in control, they can't flow, and it becomes difficult. So we spend quite a lot of time with each boxer trying to get them to understand, what's the perfect level of intensity. Do you have to be a sort of a 5 out of 10 where you're sort of quite really calm and really relaxed and in control, or do you have to be maybe a little bit higher, maybe sort of 70 where you're sort of a little bit more intense but still in control and a bit calm, or do you have to be up at 85 where you're sort of right on the edge, just keeping control there, but that's the one that's most effective for you.
Okay, brilliant. So with these, with your certain clients, do you continue to work with them for a long time, or are you sort of brought in for to deal with the problem, and then they can sort of deal with it, or do a lot of people like to keep you in the team?
Yeah, do you know, it's funny the way you describe that there. When I first started this, I had all of these really great thoughts that, I was going to help really, really top quality athletes just become that little bit better.
Yeah.
But actually, in reality, you're right. What tends to happen is that people find a problem, and if, a boxer might go undefeated, win his first 10, win his first 12, but actually sort of not addressing any of the sort of improvements in mental performance that they want to do. So actually, when they actually come to a situation where it's tough mentally, they haven't actually developed as well as they might have done in the first place. So in reality, I more often than not get contacted initially when there's been a problem.
Oh, right.
And so what we tend to do then is sort of, in the first instance for that sort of next camp, is look to address the problem in particular. And then from that moment on, over that period of time, we sort of start to talk about other areas that they may want to improve. Because boxers are tough people mentally, they're all mentally, have some real mental toughness skills. But working on psychology is so broad, so you might be, for some people, are better able to cope with pressure more. But that doesn't mean that you can't improve your ability to cope with pressure. Some people have a great ability to sort of focus during a fight, whereas others just find themselves sort of switching off a little bit. And so that doesn't mean that you can't improve your ability to focus during a fight. So it's I see it as the same as you would developing a technical skill or a physical skill. You bring somebody in to make you more powerful for a camp, and they make you more powerful. You then don't stop practicing the physical techniques that have made you more powerful. You just build on them and make them more consistent. And it's quite a simple, a similar process that I follow on the mental side too.
Okay, brilliant. It's all very, very interesting. A lot of stuff I and hopefully a lot of the listeners don't know about. So it's great to get all your views and find out a little bit more about sports psychology, because it seems to be something that it's maybe not utilised as much as it should be, especially in boxing. So obviously when it was mentioned quite openly, it was a little bit of a surprise, to be honest. So.
Yeah, well, it's funny. One of the first things I often say to boxers is how important is the mental side of boxing, and every single one of the boxers I've ever spoken to has said it's so vitally important. People even going on that it's only 10% physical but 90% mental, and then of course the follow-up question is, So what are you doing to actively improve your mental performance? And then that question is a little bit more difficult to answer. So people recognise that mental performance is vital for success in boxing, but perhaps don't quite have the idea about how you can actually train your mental performance. That doesn't mean to say that boxers don't do that. I mean, the number one thing that they do is they train so incredibly hard, make sure that they cut no corners. So when you're standing in the corner there waiting for the first bell, and you know that you've done everything you can physically and you haven't cut any corners, then that puts you in a great shape mentally. The problem then comes that actually if things then get tough during a fight and you know you've done everything and it's still tough, you can sometimes start to fall apart because you haven't sort of practiced how to maintain your emotional control.
Okay. Oh, brilliant. It's fascinating. It really is fascinating. It's such a thing I think people disregard. I think people forget the mind and body work together, don't they? So
yeah. Well, and that goes back to the point about how I really try and work closely with the trainer themselves and the strength and conditioning coach, so that what we're doing, it impacts them. I mean, I know I've had boxers who honestly, they would say they could not train any harder physically, and their trainers would say exactly the same thing. But there's been occasions where we've worked together where they've sort of understood their motivation a bit more, and so being able to approach the physical side of training in a more positive mood, which meant that they got more out of it, and they found themselves being able to physically train harder without perceiving themselves to be actually working any harder.
Finally, Sean, is there like a manager or a trainer, a boxing trainer or a football manager that has sort of inspired you in some way, who's sort of kind of been a sports psychologist without even knowing it? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. The thing is, everybody you come up, you speak to in boxing, trainers particularly, they have quite a strong sense of the mental side anyway, and it's such a tough sport. They're all actually quite inspirational. They can actually have that mental drive to actually participate and then actually succeed. So I think it'd be unfair to sort of call out any particular boxers or particular trainers in particular. But from an inspirational perspective, I've never met a boxer that I haven't felt inspired by, just by what they've achieved to get into the ring as a professional.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I completely agree with that. Yeah, that's a good point actually. So yeah, but it's just funny because I look at some of the old. I think Alex Ferguson's a good example of someone who, even in the side of getting inside the other manager's mind, is that anything you look at all?
I try and keep away from that, if I'm honest, because one thing you can't control is somebody else's reaction.
Yeah.
The thing you can control is your reaction to any situation. So, I mean, there may over time be some glaring examples of people who you sort of think, you know, that you could get in the head of the opponent. But that's quite a dangerous game, because what you want to do is get into the head of yourself and the person that you're working with, to just make sure that they're incredibly confident and that they're perceiving every situation as a positive for them. So yeah, it can be a dangerous game if you can try and get ahead of an opponent, and all you might succeed in doing is increasing their motivation. So you've always got to be aware about how it could come back and bite you.
Okay, that's very interesting actually. That makes a lot of sense as well actually. So that's you live and learn. Well, very good. Finally, mate, it's just something a bit more fun. Like who, just to tell the listeners a little bit about you. Like who's your favourite fighter out there? Who's someone you really like at the moment? Who do you enjoy watching fight?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a few. I mean, I'm a huge fan of people like Rigondeaux and obviously Mayweather as well. I think Kovalev is just incredible as well. I think I'm really looking forward to seeing him take on Stevenson, which has got to happen soon.
Yeah.
The boxers that really appeal to me are the ones that are technically excellent and that are emotionally in control. You know, those guys who can actually perform under pressure and show their skills when the pressure is at its greatest. Those are the sort of boxers that I like to watch and that I'm fascinated by.
Yeah, so it's almost not a showman as much, but like Mayweather's probably the best example, isn't he? He can sort of turn it on whenever he sort of feels like. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think like all outstanding athletes, they make things look really easy, and they make their opponents look really poor when actually their opponents are outstanding as well. And I think that's something that's really really attractive. You know, when somebody looks totally in control, when somebody looks like they know what they're doing, and that they can almost sort of dictate against an excellent opponent. I find that absolutely fascinating, and that's when you have that combination of their technical skills and their tactics being perfect, and as well as them being supremely physical shape. And then that's all brought together by them being mentally in shape as well.
Excellent, mate. Well, brilliant. Well, good to get your opinion on that. Well, I'd just like to thank you very much for coming on, Sean. It's been great to talk to you. I've learned a lot from speaking to you. I'm sure everyone else listening will do as well. And I'd just like to thank you for your time, mate.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I'm more than happy to chat anytime you wish. And if any of your listeners get in touch and have a chat about anything, then feel free.
Brilliant, mate.